So welcome Dr. Coda and Dr. Jiang to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us today. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Would you start off with telling us, each of you, telling us a story about a time that you've worked with a multilingual or a queer student that has really informed your practice?
Okay, sounds good. So in terms of a story that in relation to a multilingual student or a queer student that I have worked with, I'm just going to go. I have a few actually. So I will start with the most recent one, which was from the fall semester of 2020. So this was right after the pandemic started. And so I was teaching in the intensive English program at the University of Georgia. And so um, basically to give you some context, so this was a listening speaking class. And this was a small class during this time because, we were in the midst of the beginning of the pandemic. So anyway, so basically in this class, I had a student, and I'm just not going to give you their name because just to protect their identity. But so this student wasn't ever overtly out with me. But I think that they could tell that, well, also, first of all, by my research publications, the class discussions that I had with them, the topics that I focused on, they knew that I was someone, they could tell that I was a gay man. And so in this class, for example, in this listening speaking class, I'm going to go to this one moment in time, which is we were watching a video that was just part of our unit. And so this was just a short video. They were doing some little activity while they were watching in the video. And so during this video, and I had watched this video before, and I was sitting there and I was kind of making my own little notes. And then I hear the person on the video make a gendered comment. And what do I mean by that? So the person said, and this person was being interviewed it was on one of the national news stations. And so the person said, well, men or women need trust and connection. Men are competitive. And so this is a very, very, gendered statement. And so this student spoke up after that, actually, and started to engage in a conversation with me about it. And also I stopped the video, and it was a time for me to basically say, hey, so let's talk about this statement that was just made. And as one who advocates for queer theory, queer pedagogies in the classroom, this was a moment when I basically let this kind of slip through, almost let this heteronormativity go unquestioned. But it was that student that kind of spoke up and said, okay, so hey, let's talk about this. And so so not only with this student, but with the rest of the class, we led a discussion around gender norms. So I had them examine gender norms from their countries and cities. So what do they, we made some lists. And then we also compared that with what we have learned about gender norms in the US too, to see if they were similar, if there were contrasts, et cetera, et cetera. And so really it culminated in a very nice, we didn't do any of the other activities that I had planned that day, but I was really glad that we did that because it was a way, first of all, to interrogate gender norms in the classroom. The students were using the language to emphasize their own points of view and also their background and cultural knowledge in relation to gender norms. And then also it was just a way to really start thinking about how, and I've implemented queer theory, queer pedagogies in my classrooms before. This is really a way for me to think about, okay, so even though I advocate for this, and this is something that I feel very strongly about that should be part of every classroom, even people, that have the best intentions sometimes can fall a little short. Okay. And meaning that, I almost left this go unquestioned, but it was through that student, as well as our class discussion, that it was not left unquestioned. And also after the class, the student and I had a discussion in and around gender norms and these type of topics too. So I hope that I feel that after this was a way to, it bridged or encouraged a connection even further with this student.
And that student was brave enough to stop and say, "Hey, can we talk about this comment?" And like the person felt safe enough to be in that environment uh, to really question that. So everything's a teaching moment, and it's great that you were able to
Yes.
use that as a teaching moment.
Thank you, James, for sharing your story. I think, yeah, that's really impressive. And from my part, last year I was collaborating with a teacher in a rural area, and she is a ELA teacher in a middle school, English Language Arts. And while we were working, like we trust each other, and she told me she identified a couple of students who are LGBTQIA students in her classrooms. But she told me the environment overall is not very friendly, and she is straight, and she knows I'm straight, but she knows like I work on diversity, equity, and inclusion like in education. So she reached out to me and she asked like what kind of practice she could uh, adopt in her class to make sure the students feel respected and feel welcome in her classroom. And yeah, I'm really thankful because James used to recommend a lot of wonderful research in this area, queering education. So I shared research with her, and she tried to talk with these students privately and try to make her comments and make her lessons like also friendly and inclusive of students of diverse backgrounds, including students of LGBTQI plus backgrounds. Yeah, so this kind of experience make me realize it's important for us to be aware, to have this kind of critical self-awareness, because some students, if they trust you, they might share their stories with you, but other students, like we might need to be really proactive and advocate for students. Yeah.
The thing that's both similar in both of your stories is there was an advocate, right? There was someone that stood up and someone that asked, "Hey, I need help with this," and someone came to get resources to learn more. And then in James, your story, you talked about you were that advocate, and that student stood up, and that's what we need. So let's go towards the second question of why do schools and teachers of multilingual students need to think about queering education?
Yeah, I'm always happy to follow your preferences. Would you like to begin, James, or you want?
Fine. Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay.
So why should they care about queer representation? So we talk about making sure that we are inclusive of students' linguistic and cultural backgrounds, right? And thinking about their identities. We talk about representation, and representation matters, right? And so thinking about LGBTQIA plus students, representation matters. And so they need to see themselves in the curriculum, in the materials. So I always go back to what Cynthia Nelson said in her 2006 article, right? And so she said that the language education is mostly a monosexual, she said, meaning mostly heterosexual space in relation to research endeavors, curriculum, materials, and practice. And so for if the students aren't seeing themselves reflected in the curriculum, in the textbooks, I think of my colleague Josh Pait, and so his 2015 article talked about basically the talked about heteronormativity in the textbooks and the pervasive heteronormativity in textbooks. And so students again need to see themselves represented. They need to feel included, and if we're not doing that, then we're not serving our students. We're not creating that inclusive classroom that we should be creating. And so this, for me, is the reason why teachers, as well as university, everyone should care about queer representation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, James. I just hope to add, because I think in the field of education, we emphasize diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we always think it's important for us to provide equitable educational practice for students of diverse backgrounds. So yes, we take care of students of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. We think it's important for us to work with students with disabilities and students who are English learner students, and students who are from lower socioeconomic status. So of course, we also work with students who have the LGBTQIA backgrounds. I think this is part of the beauty of diversity, and if we want to address that, if we want to work with students of diverse backgrounds, so we also need to address like queering education and emphasize this gender-friendly, identity-friendly education.
I still remember when I was a little elementary school kid, there was always like there was always like African American month, like Heritage Month, right? And then slowly when I went to middle school or towards the end, there was finally like Latinx or like Hispanic Heritage Month, right? But never was there like Pride Month, right? And like that was like a no thing at my school where we had like uh, morning prayer at the flag, and I was like, ooh, you could tell what kind of culture my high school was at. So the fact that it's like there's spheres of diversity, and it's like the LGBTQI community is always the last one, or like the differently abled people are always the last one to be included. It's always like the physical diversity that we see first, and then it's the sexual orientation that's like the last one, right? But that's so close to a person's identity. Right? Do you want to talk about that?
I agree. It is definitely close to, it's part of so I take a post-structuralist approach to identities as multiple, as Whedon says in 1987 in her book, The Multiple Contested Contradictory. But as part of the multiple identities that we all inhabit as speaking subjects in this world, identifying that LGBTQIA plus identity is one of the multiple identities, and it needs to be affirmed in the classroom, right? And Tom, I'm thinking about what you just said in relation to that it's kind of one of the last ones to kind of go. And if you look in schools too, some schools I visited, the Pride Month you don't really see, right? There's no affirmation of LGBTQIA plus identities. And so this is all the more necessary then. We need to do this in our classrooms, right? If the schools aren't doing it, then we have to, us as educators, we have to do that in our classrooms to compensate for what, or the lack of attention to those identities in the rest of the school.
Yeah, it's like, so I have multiple identities, right? Being gay, Asian, Buddhist, refugee, poor, like low socioeconomic backgrounds. Those are all my identities. And to say you're free to show this, and this about you, but this part you should really hide, right? So it's like I start to question like if that part of me is not okay, maybe the other parts of me are not okay as well. So this is why we say we need to welcome and celebrate the whole student, not just the part that's convenient for us to do that during certain months.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more. I think that's very well said.
So let's move to your research. Can you talk about your research in this paper?
Yeah, I can start. So, this research consists of a couple of case studies in which we use TPRS, which is teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling, and also CI, which is a comprehensible input. We use this method to work with teachers in a teacher education program, and in which we try to embody this and to showcase like how we can queer language education in the classrooms. Yeah.
So take us into your research. What was your case study about, and how did it work?
Okay, so basically these were two Mandarin workshops, 2 3-day Mandarin workshops. One of them was in 2016 and the other was in 2018. And so in the one workshop, there were 43 participants. In the other workshop, the Mandarin B, there were 41 participants. There was also a survey that was sent out after that. And so basically in relation to this study, so we were looking at ways that TPRS could be a way for troubling how, and when I say troubling, I'll get to that in a second, but troubling how languages are taught, as well as the content in it that is taught in and through TPRS. And so what do I mean by troubling? So I return to queer theory and queer pedagogies, but first to queer theory. And so queer theory is just a way of making strange, as Sullivan in 2001 talks about. What does that mean to make strange? So upending normal, right? And so in language instruction, what we're saying, what we're basically arguing in this article too, as well as some previous articles, um, is basically that, there's these kind of normal ways, what we call normal ways of teaching languages, right? And so what we're saying is that TPRs can be a queer way or a way to upend how languages are taught. So, for example, these co-constructed stories, personalized questions and answers, so this can be a different way for teaching languages and focusing heavily on comprehensible input. So taking that back to Krashen as well as others that have taken up that notion as well since then. And so now in terms of the content, this we were looking at teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling as a way to look at these stories and see, can this be a way to deconstruct or to challenge heteronormativity in the classroom or in the content. And so as we observed in these two case studies, or in these classrooms rather, we saw that there were opportunities where people, for example, where the teacher was able to challenge heteronormativity with the students, where things were not, as I said earlier, almost left heteronormativity unquestioned. So where the teacher was able to challenge heteronormativity and not leave it unquestioned. So basically, that's kind of a summary of what I see in relation to this article as well as this research. But Lei, could you add anything if you would like?
I also hope to add, in our article, like, yes, we use TPRS and CI, and we also like advocate for this queering education and inclusion, and we like using this kind of methods. I think it's also important for us to learn from, like, not only using these methods, but also like try to be self-reflexive and have this kind of critical self-awareness when we work with teachers, when we work with students, to promote this kind of sense. Yeah.
So tell us about in your article I read there was a story like a transcript. Would you help us go through the transcript, that story of what did it look like to actually queer language in a multilingual classroom?
So yeah, I hope to give a background. So in TPRS, usually teachers and students, they co-construct the stories. They come up with the stories together, and while telling these stories, students learn the language, yeah, practice the new linguistic knowledge, language knowledge. And then the teacher wants to tell a story about David and Robert. And then the the first, the teacher talks about a story between Robert and Michelle. So from the name, you can tell it's a male and a female. And then the students said, like the teachers first said, Robert gives Michelle chocolate. And then the students added romantically. And then the teacher said, oh, Robert gives Michelle a chocolate romantically. And then the teacher moved to talk about the relations between David and Robert. And then the students said, oh, David likes Robert. So they come into this space. And then the teacher said, okay, David gave Robert Hershey's chocolate. And then the students add, yes, David gave Robert the chocolate romantically, and Robert likes David as well. So while co-constructing the stories, the teachers and the students, they come up with these ideas, and then they gradually like transition into this gender-friendly, LGBTQIA-friendly space. And yeah, so the teachers work with the students together, which like challenges this kind of normality. Yes.
Okay, so in this transcript, it was the teacher. First of all, thank you for telling us about what TPRS is. I was like, oh wait, I don't know what it is. It's great for you to tell me. Thank you for that background. And then the transcript, it was the first example was Michelle and Robert, right? And then how did they transition between like two men?
So so first of all, the teacher came up with the example of Robert and Michelle, and then the students like provided the context. Okay, they are in a relationship, in a romantic relationship. So the teacher followed this thread, and they talk about like how Robert gave Michelle the chocolate romantically. And then the teacher come up with another two fictional characters. It's Robert and David. So yeah, and then the students continued this co-construction of the stories, and then the students proposed, okay, so they also have a romantic relation, and then Robert gave David the chocolate romantically. Yeah, that's how it goes.
Right. So now, what happens when um, students are so they're co-constructing? This is wonderful. This is very similar to the language experience approach, but uh, so not but and what if students are like, this is kind of weird. I'm not culturally, I'm not used to talking about two men or two women in this way. What do you do with that?
Really, and I'm thinking back to like, and I'm going to use part of the article or a transcript out of the article. So, for example, in table 9, so this is around basically the teachers is telling a story, co-constructing a story with the students, and it's around Donald Trump and Obama, right? And so, are they friends? So, it starts out by asking things like that: who is this? Are they friends? Um, and so it leads later on to basically, as we see in table 9, that the teacher says it's a secret. It's a secret. Why is this secret? Because they are friends. They are friends. And then the teacher says they are boyfriends, and 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 so the students erupt in laughter, right? Now, in terms of laughter, we can look at laughter as maybe a few different ways, right? It could be students being a little uncomfortable with, for example, two men being romantically involved together, right? Or it could be just around these two characters, right, that are now romantically linked. We can surmise, but in terms of dealing with anything that may come up, or a student or students who may be uncomfortable with this. This goes back to really what I think about queer theory, right? So again, upending normal, making strange. And so I think about Nelson's 1999 seminal article on sexual identities in ESL. And so she basically, in that article, she looked at a community college classroom where Roxanne, the pseudonym for the teacher, basically used queer theory in the classroom. And so what happened was the students, for example, were looking at a worksheet. They had to choose, they were looking at modal verbs, et cetera, et cetera. And the teacher had to, or the students, there was the thing like that said, where it said 2 women are walking arm in arm, and they could say they could be this, they could be friends, they could be lesbians, they could be da 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 da. And so basically, so Cynthia Nelson recorded this classroom transcript, or this classroom discussion, excuse me, around this discussion of this number 4 on the worksheet. And so basically, the teacher used it as a way to not just predicate it on inclusion versus excluded. So the thing that Cynthia Nelson says about inclusion exclusion, right? Taking that approach, right? Because we ask who gets included and who gets excluded. And so, for example, if we're showing depictions of what LGBTQIA people look like, are we just putting some for white middle upper class person up there? So she advocates again for queer theory. So to deconstruct how it even became normal, and for you to approach that sentence, they could be lesbians, or 2 women walking arm in arm, to get you to think about why you even approached it the way that you did. So thinking about the interpretations that you have, the assumptions that you may have about when you look at something, or look at a group of, if you look at 2 women arm in arm together, why you're looking at it the way that you do. And so this, for me, and especially I've been in some different, how do I want to say this, environments that are not as amenable to LGBTQIA issues. And so for me, queer theory has been a way to kind of get around that, but also to to get the students to think about why they're thinking about sexual identities or gender identities in the ways in which they are, and to get them to deconstruct to see that it's just, it's social and it's cultural, the reasons that you are thinking the way that you are, and to
Right.
challenge those ways
Right.
to be more inclusive of various identities in the world.
Right. Right. Because beliefs are thoughts that have been planted when we were young, right? And then we
Exactly.
nurture them until they're a force, and we have to really think, this is the force that I want to be in.
Exactly.
So now, what happens when teachers or admins they learn about what we do and this wonderful approach, and they're like, are you trying to convert kids? What do you do about that?
Great question.
Because the gays are out there trying to recruit, aren't we?
Of course, all the time. All the
All
time,
the
every
time.
day, right? That's what
I
I'm
have a
trying to
quota, right? Oh yeah.
do. Yeah, I got to check that off.
Yeah, so I would also draw on the ideas from culturally responsive and relevant and sustaining pedagogies. Like when we work with students of diverse backgrounds, when we have teacher education programs with teachers, it is not our ultimate goal like to convince everyone or to coerce everyone to to do to this same exact way to work with students of different backgrounds like LGBTQIA plus, racial and ethnic minority English learner students. So as Tan and James, you both mentioned, I think it's important for us to plant the seed in the teachers' minds. Like it's important for us to make them understand, like invite them to understand the importance of the friendly educational environment is for students and also for teachers themselves, rather than telling them, okay, you should do this way, you should do this way. That is not the idea of culturally sustaining or gender identity friendly environment. Yeah, so that's my opinions, also based on this article. Yeah.
Right. It all comes down to relationships with students. If students feel like they are not represented, or they just feel like the teacher doesn't get them, they're gonna like, well, okay, I'm just gonna be in your class until we finish the end of year, but I'm not gonna relate to you, and I'm gonna do the minimal work. But when a student feels like, okay, you get me, you see me, and you value me, I'm gonna invest more in this lesson or in this year with you.
So
Yeah, as the famous saying goes, students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them.
that's
Yeah.
right. That makes me think of when I'm in my second or third year of K through 12 teaching, back around like 2014. So I had a student. This was in a conservative school in a rural area of the southeast, and so the student, she identified as lesbian, teenager, and so she basically was labeled as the troubled student by others in the school. And I wondered oftentimes, was it due to because they didn't like her because she identified as a lesbian, and et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, and when she decided to take Spanish 1 with me, she came into my class and I valued her identity, right? Now, I couldn't speak about my identity, but it was pretty well known in the community, right? It's a small rural place. They knew who I was. And so she really flourished in my classroom because it goes back to what you guys were both just saying, which is the student has to know that you care about them. And I showed that in my teaching and also in my interactions and everything. So the behavioral issues that other teachers spoke of in relation to her did not occur in my classroom because I valued her identities. I also let her write about what she wanted. When we did role plays, she and other female students could play wives together and do what they wanted. So again, it's about letting the students feel valued in the classroom, right? It's about making them feel valued and affirming their identities and saying, I value you. And you do that through through your practice.
When a teacher stands with an LGBT student, LGBTQI plus student, the students feel like, wow, I am safe here. It really matters. I still remember when I was many, many years ago in my last year of high school, and I put my name in to be prom queen, and the school took that and was like, okay, Tan, do you really want to be prom queen? Because we can put your name down on a ballot. And I was like, you're really going to consider this? I thought you were just going to go rip it out because I just wanted to make a statement that we can do this and I can do this and I have the right to do this. Um, and of course, I didn't identify as a woman, so I said, no, that's, I just wanted to test to see if this was okay. And that was enough for me to know that I was accepted. Because they were going to say, yes, your name's going to be in the ballot if you say yes, because we want to honor that. And this was like a very uh, conservative community. And yet, when they did that, I will always remember that teacher who stood up for me.
That's great. That's really excellent. Again, you're going to always, that's what I always say, the impact that teachers make on students, you'll never know sometimes,
Right.
but you always got to think about that impact
Right.
that you're making every
Right.
single day.
Right. And I think it's particularly important because both you and I, James, identify as gay, but Lei, you said you don't identify as gay, but yet you still support the LGBTQI plus community. So tell us about that messaging that you have uh, to teachers who are not queer identified.
I think yeah, it's really important. Like we as educators don't like work alone by ourselves, because I think the communicative work, the collaborative work is always important. Yeah, so I, uh, I, I think it's important, like when we focus on the pedagogies themselves, and we focus on like such as TPRS and CI. It's not only, of course they are important, but it's not only about the methods themselves. It's also through our critical awareness. It's also through collaborative work, and also it's about the environments. Like I understand, like students, they need to be recognized, but I think the individual teachers, one or two, is definitely not enough. Like we need to collaborate with each other for the agenda, like LGBTQIA context and identity, and also for all like very important diverse and equitable agenda, like race and ethnicity, like yeah, socioeconomic status, like multicultural, multilingual, all these kind of settings. I think it's important for us to work together. Like we can't expect like one teacher to work by themselves and can overcome everything. I think that's unrealistic, and also that's irrespectable as well.
Right. That goes back to Dr. John Hattie's work on collective teacher efficacy when everyone comes together to say, we believe in this, not just one teacher that believes in this. So the student feels like, oh, I'm not just safe in Mr. Jian's room. I'm safe in every single classroom, right? Throughout the school. So let's end with this. What is one simple way to start querying language uh, that you would recommend teachers can start with?
Yeah, I think you just mentioned one simple step, right? The first step. I think the first step is always with our educators ourselves. Like I think before we reach out, before we like think about like rely on others, we need to have this critical self-reflexive practice. Like we need to be open. Like the change starts with ourselves, and be open to students, to our colleagues, to the environment. Like we need to listen instead of like just relying on our past experiences and then make decisions. Yeah.
So to start off, I would say that it would be basically showing that you are being inclusive of various identities, right? So that means on the things that you have on your wall in your K through 12 classrooms, starting off, for example, with your own pronouns, right? So which pronouns do you use in relation to yourself? And then also when you're starting with, like, for example, an interest inventory, like in the K-12 system, right? And I also do that too in my university classes to learn about my students' backgrounds and what their interests are, but to also put it out there on your first day of class. So what pronouns do you identify? Make sure it's something that, like a form, it could be a Google form or something, you're starting off the classroom then by saying, okay, so I want to know more about you. I want to know how I should refer to you. Also creating, I would say another way to on that first day is to make sure that you're creating a classroom of respect towards others, and make sure that that is prominent, that the students know that from day one, for example, and you can construct these rules of respect together, something that I did in my K through 12, and especially in relation to any, you may be in the classroom, you may discuss what are considered to be controversial topics, right? And so you need to cultivate that respect for differences, and to also respect for one another too, right? That we are showing that we are all in this together.
Well, what a wonderful way to end, and thank you for advocating for the queer community, both in terms of teachers but also students.